August 16th meeting of the Lake Havasu City Airport Advisory Board. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, Lichtel, would you conduct a roll call, please?
Yes. Shannon Stebbins.
Here.
Lewis Worthy.
Here.
Dave McNary.
Here.
Brian Schultz.
Here. Here.
Shannon Hicks. Here.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item is the call to the public. This is when you have the opportunity to address this board on anything that's under the jurisdiction of the board. Your comments must be limited to 5 minutes or less. If you wish to address an item already on today's agenda, we'd ask that you wait until the item is announced as a public hearing. At the conclusion of the open call to the public, individual members of the board may respond to any criticisms made by those who address the board. They may ask staff to review a matter or may ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. However, board members cannot discuss or take any legal action on matters not already on the agenda. Is there anyone present who would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll go on to item 5, which is approval of the July 19th, 2017 minutes. So I would ask for a motion for approval.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes from last meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Unanimously approved. Item 6 is communications announcement and airport supervisors report. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Steve Johnson, who's our airport manager, for his report.
All right, as you can see, this will be a little lengthy, and I've got a couple items to add in here that just transpired today. So that all being said, we met with the FAA, ADOT, CNS engineers, Kaufman Associates, our annual CIP meeting down in Phoenix on the 26th of July. The meeting ran for 2 hours. There was lots of interaction back and forth. Our next grant is still the master plan. All of the projects that we submitted have shifted based on priorities and costs. A listing of them are, at this point, the master plan, which we anticipate getting a grant offer for that probably May, June of this coming year. Beyond that, design taxiway alpha reconstruction, construct alpha taxiway. That'll be a different year, by the way. Design, construct distance to go signs, design runway overlay, another year, or that year, design, construct the PAPI for runway 32, construct a runway overlay, another year, design, construct flush mount fire hydrants for the airfield, design and construct hazard markings, and as I said, the project list changes every time we meet with them. It morphs a wee bit. Revised cost estimates are being generated as we speak, and we did share a sample of our failing runway, as well as photos of the maintenance we've accomplished over the past months, which again made a big hit with the meeting. That all being said, new developments were discussed. The reason for going through our project list and revising the numbers is about a year ago, FAA came up with design guidelines, and one of the things that the consultants didn't quite realize, and airports, many of us didn't realize, is that these new requirements are significant. So anytime there's construction on the airport, and I'll use an example of, say, a taxiway connector from taxiway alpha to the runway. Those radius, those turns, have to be redesigned, which means they're going to rip the pavement out. They're going to move the lights. They're going to put new wiring in for the lights. They're going to put new base in for the pavement, and then they're going to pave over that. So any kind of project, it drives the cost up significantly. And that's one of the reasons for all the projects morphing about as they did this last meeting. Pavement levels were discussed. The PCI report, I'll speak to that more in a little bit because we've managed to get that report a little bit earlier thanks to my assistant out there at the airport. Other airports don't have it and won't until December. We have it. So we have numbers, which I'll share in a moment. We're waiting for the go-ahead approval on the foreign object debris project at the north end of the airport. I believe this week, probably the end of the week, all that paperwork will be into ADOT for them to process. And so the next thing we'll end up doing is going to bid on that once they've okayed all of that. Pre-bid meeting for the electrical vault was held on August 10th. We toured the vault and the wiring runs. Bids were open today, and I'll speak to that in a moment. There were six interested parties, 3 of which bid today. An addendum was produced, some minor dynamics there, nothing major. And I expect CNS will have the review of all the bid packets done by Friday. And FAA expects a grant approval back to them signed no later than the 31st. Construction management scope with CNS and the costs are in hand. I've reviewed that. I'll be obtaining a independent estimate, which is a federal requirement for that, and then we'll negotiate with CNS, and then we'll be taking both that and the bid, which I'll talk to in a minute, to the City Council for approvals. And at least at this point, we're shooting for early September if all the timelines work. August 10th, MSD, airport staff, our engineering consultants toured the airfield, and we discussed maintenance options. This goes back to the PCI, I'm sorry. And so came up with some priorities for that. At this point, it appears rejuvenation of our runway connectors is probably number 1. This will tie back to the PCIs here in a moment. Looking at increasing the lifespan of those pavement areas by about 4 years. Crack sealing on the worst areas of Taxiway Alpha, and then a few other projects as well. We will be working on putting pavement rejuvenator on Alpha 2 once we schedule some time and get some good estimates. We're going to install a new antenna on the light pole closest to the terminal and just to the north for the AWAS. And the goal is to have that done this September. We fixed 2 air conditioning units. Well, actually fixed 1 at the terminal. We're working on another, which continues to have issues. We'll be doing the street renaming sign for George Molitor this Saturday at 10 a.m. out at the airport. Gate 9 is where that street is. Hangar Way will turn to George Molitor Way. We continue to have discussions and meetings with Hangar 24 in regards to the air show on November 4th. We'll have a second meeting probably sometime next week, and we'll follow up with the FAA down at Phoenix as well. Right now it appears we're going to have military flybys, air show routines, which we haven't had at the airport since 2002 or 1, and static display of aircraft. We'll be advising the tenants. We're still getting some of details on that. Right now, it looks like tentative closures of the airport will be Saturday, the 4th, from 12 to 5, and possibly for a couple hours the day prior for the acts of practice out there at the airport. We're working up a policy for shadeport tenants in regards to where cars end up being parked. which I think I've mentioned before. We're also working on cleaning up the car parking lot and a couple other spots on the airport where we've had cars park and we have no way to get a hold of folks, and in some cases parking in right-of-ways. We're working on rotating, and I believe this will happen next week, a street light that's adjacent to the unpaved parking that Hangar 24 uses, that's down the hill there. We're going to flop the light to where it lights the parking lot as opposed to the street for a safety item for the employees there. The new airport design guidelines, actually I've already spoken to this. Actually no. I think in a past report to you all, I had mentioned that we were thinking of putting 3 tie downs under the large shade port, but based on these design guidelines, that's not going to happen with the FAA. So it's going to remain as it is. The D2 hangar development is moving forward. Right now it appears that construction will probably begin late in the year, possibly November, December. That's moving along. We've had a number of military helicopters stop by and fuel at the airport. We also had a couple of F-16s yesterday do a flyby. We've had the Navy recruiter utilize the TSA space, which we also have CIP use. They come in about once a month, so they ran a couple weeks ago. We repaired a damaged antenna that Civil Air Patrol uses on the terminal roof. Our underground storage tanks have had their annual inspection. We're in the process of obtaining an estimate to repair one of the tanks, or if that doesn't work, allow the FBO to pull their fuel out of the tank, and then we'll discontinue use of it. You'll note further on in here, we have some surveys in your packet in regards to hangar rates at other airports. What else here? We are in the process of drafting a cleanup plan, is what I'm going to call it, for the locator signs we have at the airport. Those are the blue background signs with the white letters. As you've all seen, they have really faded. So we're looking to replace them, but with something very similar and rather simple and a little easier to fix as tenants come and go. So the PCI report, we managed to get an early version of it, which I think we're the only airport in state that's done that, thanks to Rondi. And that all being said, the values, and remember that a value of 55 is failing. Our runway, which was done 3 years ago, was supposed to be at 100% and should be in the 90s somewhere. Per this survey, it's 63 to 60. So the pavement is going away, which is one of the reasons why such a high priority on putting that rejuvenator on the connectors. The north ramp is at 38 to 58, Bravo taxiway 49, terminal ramp at 51, central ramp at 49, the central hangar taxi lays at 52, taxiway alpha at 49, the runway connectors at 65. So that gives you a sense of why all that movement of projects in our CIP with the FAA. And then this afternoon at 3 o'clock, we have an apparent low bidder for the electrical vault in a range of either $396,000 to $397,000. We got 3 bids. It looks like they were all good bids at this point. They're being reviewed as we speak. FAA has been advised the total electrical vault grant should be $548,677. FAA's share of that will be $499,625. ADOT's $24,526, and our city share the same as that. As far as events, the 99th Air Rally is scheduled for November 9th through the 11th out there at the airport, and then of course the air show on the 4th of November from about 11 in the morning till probably about 5 in the afternoon. And for that event, at least the sense I'm getting at this point, Since it is an air show, there will be an FAA representative out here during that, which we haven't had for any of our open houses. And with that, any questions?
Have any questions? Just have a comment on the street renaming. I'd like to invite anyone in the public to attend that. George Molitaro certainly had a marked presence at the airport for years and years and years. So at 10 o'clock at the intersection of Hangar Way and what's that other?
Wheelan.
Wheelan Drive and Hangar Way. Thank you. I have a real problem remembering that name for some reason. There will be 2 or 3 speakers and we'll unveil the sign. So we'd like to invite you all to attend that. No questions? We'll move along to the next item, which is a public hearing, the first one, which is a review of the draft airport vision statement. And let me turn it over to our committee representative and present what they've come up with.
I think we talked about, excuse me, okay. I see the draft vision statement actually is a little bit longer than we had anticipated. There we go, thank you. If you're using the stapled packet, if you just stop at the word environment and include that and X everything else out after that, you will have the current proposed Lake Havasu City Municipal Airport Vision Statement. I think everybody is okay reading it, unless you want me to read that. Not necessary, okay. We've batted this back and forth for several months now with different iterations, and I think that this kind of meets everybody's requirements at this point. So is there any discussion over this?
Dave McNary also submitted another vision statement, which I do not have with me, which was somewhat shorter. That was also good. You have it? Oh. Okay. And in his version, okay. The Lake Havasu City Municipal Airport strives to be the hometown airport that provides uncompromised safety, unparalleled service, and leadership in both commercial and general aviation by meeting the current and future needs of our community. Actually, they both pretty much say the same things. Any other comments?
No comment here. I think it's time to vote.
Well, we don't have something to vote on yet because we have 2 different statements.
Okay.
The only comment that I have on what the committee's come up with is that the environment, I'm all for protecting the environment, but as a prerequisite to anything that's done with the FAA, you have to do an environmental impact study, and everything that they touch has that as a prerequisite. I don't know that, although it's always a goal and it's a requirement, I don't know if we need to state that.
I think it's always nice for the public to keep in mind that we do respect and consider the environment. And I didn't realize that we were going to have the old one brought back up again. I thought we had decided that we kind of were going to go with what the committee adapted here from last meeting, so I guess we're stalled for another month at least.
I don't know that that's true. I sent out an email and asked everybody to think about it. So do we have any other input, or anybody want to make a motion on what they would like to see, and we can vote on it? Let me also say that it doesn't, no matter what we vote on, this is just presented to staff for their consideration. It's,
Sure, and they can,
unless we take something to the
Yep.
city council, it's just a suggestion.
right, and they can modify it as they require, but.
So anyone want to make a motion, or do you want to table?
I'll make a motion to go ahead with the one that you emailed us with the environment in it. I think a lot of people don't know what the FAA requirements are, and I don't think the environment's a bad thing to have in there because a lot of people do think airplanes burn a bunch of fuel, bad for the environment, bad for all these things. So it can't hurt to try and win them over a little bit more.
I second that motion.
Okay, probably need to have a roll call vote. I abstain. Start down at this end.
I approve.
I vote for.
I vote for.
I approve.
I approve.
I approve.
Motion carries. I am somewhat remiss in that this should have been opened up for public comment before we voted. I don't know if we have anyone here that wants to make a comment or not, but I apologize. The next item is hangar self-inspection. This is tied to the hangar inspection that's been on our agenda for several months and that we need to move forward with. I think that what's happened is that the airport manager was delayed in mailing out the policy to the airport tenants, waiting on the fire department to come up with a self-inspection form. It seems that the fire department has decided that they don't have the personnel to do the biannual fire inspections any longer, so they're asking us to do a self-inspection. I think each of you have this form. I have some issues that have been expressed to me, and I think that once we mail this form out, there's going to be quite a bit of public comment on it. Number one, at the top of the form, it says, note, a no answer is a code violation and must be corrected and documented. All aircraft hangars are required to comply with the National Fire Protection Agency regulations. Self-inspections are required to be conducted annually by lessees or their agenda. I am personally not aware of any Lake Havasu ordinance that requires a self-inspection. So I'm wondering what the authority is for this.
I don't think it's in your lease either.
Oh, it's definitely not in my lease. It's not anybody's lease that I'm aware of. In addition, if we just look at the first paragraph, which is general fire precautions and aircraft maintenance, I've highlighted 5 items on my copy that a no answer would be a violation. So I'm not quite sure how we have a checklist that if you put a yes violation, a yes there, it would be a violation when they're saying, or you need to put a no, or it would be a violation. So they're contradictory right there. So as I go through this, there is an awful lot of stuff here that has no bearing on a hangar. For example, aircraft operation, AOA, and related areas free from all combustible debris. That's not any hangar owner's purview. That's the taxiways. The airport operation area is defined by the FAA, and that's certainly not inside someone's hangar. Potential ignition sources except in approved locations where approved by the fire department. Well, if the fire department's not coming to inspect, how do you know if they approve it? Electrical and mechanical rooms free from stored combustible materials. So there are very few hangars on the airport that have electrical and mechanical rooms. None of the, go ahead.
Steve, do you know, is this a blanket document that they took from somewhere else?
I don't. My understanding is this was drawn up. As you, I think any of you with a hangar, as you all recall in the past, we had helpful little trifold brochures that spoke generally to don't have oily rags, don't have your grinder out there. If you have any electrical work done, have it done by somebody under code and approved by the city. I've never seen this form before.
Mr. Chairman?
Sir.
I look at this form and I see a need for at least a column that has a not applicable. Because, for example, our doors leading into electrical control panel rooms marked with a durable and legible sign stating electrical room. As you stated, hangars don't have electrical rooms, so that would be either, It doesn't, I don't see any place where it says leave it blank if it doesn't apply, or, but if you have to put an answer in there, what do you put? So I think we need some more education, so to speak, from the fire department to how this is supposed to apply.
Or maybe we need a column that says NA, Mr. Chairman.
Well, this form is not something that we have any control over.
Would it be advantageous for us to invite somebody from the fire department to the meeting and explain it, or?
There's some other things in here that I'd like to just quickly touch on. Another thing at the top says noncompliance may result in the issuance of a civil citation and additional inspection fees. I'd like to know what the authority is for that. So I guess my suggestion is, number one, if our airport manager is told to mail this out, I think he has to mail it out. That's not a problem. I hate for this to delay the hangar inspection stuff going out so that we can get into the hands of the tenants what's there. What I would like to see is, I'd like to ask, do you know whether or not this whole form or any of this has gone before the city attorney to find out what her stance is on it?
I'm not aware.
Mr. Clark?
Yeah, I guess how we see this is the fire department informed us that they didn't have the staff to participate in the inspections, and they handed this to us and asked us to include that in our the packets. And so our intent would be to include that in the packets, perform the inspections, notify the fire department if, as a part of those inspections, we identify things that we are uncomfortable with, and then ask for their expertise on that. So in other words, if we do our inspection or the inspection and are comfortable with it, we would just move on, and then we would notify the fire department of either the completion of the form or the non-completion of the form, and then the inspection would be incomplete pending that resolution. I think we have several options here, one of which is for you to request some information from the fire department at either a public meeting or maybe a subcommittee meeting, or however you want to handle it from that end, and staff will be happy to participate in that process to get some additional information, maybe point out some clarification issues and go down that road. But we still don't think that this form slows the process of performing the inspections and going through that process. It just makes it a little bit more difficult to determine if something is marginal. We're still going to have to go through the process of contacting the fire marshal and saying, hey, we want you to come out here and take a look at this, because this does appear to be something that we would have, or someone would have a concern about. So depending upon whether you want to go ahead and proceed with the inspections, or delay that process pending this discussion, or go for that either one of those is fine.
I don't personally have issue with anything that you've said, and I understand your department's given something to hand out, and you comply with it. I have some real, I had a gentleman who owns a hangar that has seen this. He raised a lot of questions that I can't answer, one of which is, what's the authority? So that's the first question.
Right.
The next is, if he signs this, what liability does he have? He's not,
Right.
He related to me, I'm not a fire inspector. So what happens if I sign this, although he couldn't, I mean, there's several things on here that you could not sign. Right. So I have a lot of questions on the liability issues. So my request, and I entertain anyone on the board, but my personal feeling is that I'd like to see this sent to the city attorney to get her take on it.
Well,
Before, and I'm not suggesting that be done before you send it out. I don't have an issue with that.
well, no, and I guess the point of it is I don't know that we really, the MSD or the airport manager really has that authority, because it's not our form. That's really the fire department's bailiwick to have that discussion. Now, I think it's totally appropriate for, as a part of the process, if we want a representative of the fire department to be here so that you can communicate those questions to them, they may choose to research their form a little bit further and maybe come up with some different variations or whatever. But the reality of it is we're going to include the form if we choose to move forward with the inspections. We'll include the form, and whether they're returned or not, that's a kind of a thing that the fire department will have to determine how they want to interpret that data, because it really is it is data for them to either require an inspection or not require an inspection and go through those old processes. Now, I can understand completely someone choosing to not return it or to return it unsigned or return it with all kinds of caveats on it, and that would be, again, between the hangar owner and the fire department, because the ultimate discussion is that the fire department can come out at any time and do an inspection and figure out what they want to do, so.
And I think most people would welcome that. I think that what's happened in the past is all hangars were inspected on a biannual basis every 2 years. I don't know of, the most egregious violation that I'm aware of is somebody's fire extinguisher being out of date, and they go get it inspected and take it by the fire department and everything's fine. I have a real problem when somebody sends me a form that says non-compliance will result in the issuance of a civil violation. So obviously we can't resolve this. We don't have the people here that can answer the questions. So what I would propose to do is if you or your staff are uncomfortable with presenting this to the city attorney, I'm not uncomfortable with presenting it to her at all. So I'd be happy to present it to her and ask her for an official opinion on it.
I don't know that the board has that authority, so that's something we'll have to ask Kelly about too, or whatever, and go down that road.
Oh, I think I have the authority to talk to the city attorney.
Okay.
I think so. If not, I'll go talk to the city council at the next city council meeting.
Well, and that would have been, like I said, obviously Cal would have been here. We might have had a little bit of input about
Right.
where they were kind of feeling this would go or whatever, but
Well, I think you can appreciate that when people are sent something like this that has quite a bit of threatening language in it, that obviously has a plethora of things that don't pertain to them in it, that there is going to be a public question. So I go back to what I'm asking. You don't know if the fire department submitted this to the city attorney?
correct.
It's been given to me as a hangar tenant, so I guess I can submit it to her as a citizen. I don't have to be the chairman of this board to, I'd open it up to other people on the board for your comments.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, our position here is to report back to the city council. The pushback Steve and the airport is going to get from this is going to be unbelievable. When I first read that, going through the notes, I couldn't believe the stuff that was in there. Some of it, most people aren't going to make sense of, doesn't apply to them, and the language was quite strong. I can definitely see that there's going to be a lot of upset people that it'd be nice to at least have some answers or a plan in advance. And I think to have the attorney looked at, even if it's just you as a tenant, I would think that's a reasonable request.
I have a question. Is there some crucial time frame that the city has to implement this program, this new program, so they're in compliance with something, or? Because, I mean, to me, it just doesn't seem like it's complete and should be implemented yet.
What new program are you talking about?
This new program right here, of the fire department not doing the inspections, and now
Again, that's
people who own inspections
a
making it.
policy level discussion the airport or the fire department is trying to implement, and there's no time frame related to implementation or the action. I would use that as a better term. The action for the self-inspection, other than whether that self-inspection is a part of our annual inspections or not. So I think that's really the only time frame that this is tied to. The answer is we could move forward with our inspections and have mailed out the forms and get no response on the forms because of these concerns, and we'll still proceed with everything that we intend to do and actions. And then if the forms come in later and they decide to go with the forms and that's what they want to do, or if they decide to follow up and do personal inspections, that's fine. But I think
Just with your answer tells me that nobody has the answers to this, or the people that do either didn't think about this stuff, or they should have got with somebody and worked all this out. Because from what I understand, Steve was supposed to send these out like tomorrow.
I would anticipate that the fire department didn't anticipate any concerns related to that, and we'll communicate that to them now that we've had this voice to us. And it would be totally appropriate, if you want to wait a month, to have the fire department here answering those questions, and obviously we can give them enough of a heads up so whoever comes to the meeting is ready to answer those questions. And in the meantime, I would assume that they would visit with the city attorney and have that discussion in advance. So that's something that they can do.
I just can't see myself as a taxpayer mailing something out that's not complete in my view, and then have to have the fire department in the city deal with the unrest that it probably will cause. That's, at least the city didn't used to operate like that, so.
I'm not so sure that I would use the term unrest. I would assume that non-compliance would be more of
Well,
the
I
appropriate.
know some of the people at the airport and they're gonna be pretty unrested about it.
Mr. Clark, I appreciate the fact that this is not under your purview, and I appreciate that you can't answer these questions because this was something that was given to you to do, and I appreciate that you need to execute that. I am a little bit, I'm trying to search for the right word. I am a little bit amazed that you're giving me pushback for going to the city attorney with something that I think deserves answers, so.
No.
That
no.
I'd have to say.
No. And don't misunderstand. The city attorney obviously works for the council. They take direction from the council and the staff. They work with the staff. The city attorney doesn't, and this has occurred in other things where citizens think that they're owed an explanation from the city attorney or they want to explore. That's the process that I don't quite think works that way, because, for example, we're given a specific list of those people, staff, who are able to request legal services and not request legal services, so it's not a blanket authority that all city employees have. So that's the nuance that I'm trying to make sure I understand. I think there's a mechanism of getting the city attorney to provide that information. I just don't know that it's a request from the chairman or Steve. It should be a request from the fire department chief or someone else.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I don't think that I have the authority to request for legal opinion from her to expend dollars. However, I think what we're trying to tell you is that when this gets mailed out in its present form, it's going to cause, my words are going to be very calm compared to what you're going to see sitting out here in this audience. Where you see one person tonight, you're going to see 40. And it's going to be very uncomfortable. And if it seems to me that, and I'm not suggesting that you not mail it out, I'm just suggesting that we come up with these answers, and maybe we mail something right out afterwards that says, no. I personally am not aware that the city council has passed resolutions or ordinances that require this. So my question is this in compliance with like Havasu City ordinance? It's just a basic question, and obviously there's no one here that can answer that.
And give Steve credit for the answer is the reason we have this as an item is because we also understood that this may be a concern and
I have no quarrel with you. I understand that I'm putting you on the spot.
We wanted to give it a public process so that when we go back to the fire department and say, hey, this is an issue, it's not just staff saying that.
Just for me, I suggest that you go to the fire department and explain to them in no uncertain terms that it's going to cause a great deal of angst among people at the airport. And right now, I'm just representing the 4 or 5 people that I've shown this to and representing what their reaction was to it. Most of the people on the board just got this earlier this week, so.
Yeah, I can guarantee you that tomorrow Steve's going to send an email to whoever he received this from and indicate that we had some serious concerns from the airport board, and they may want to rethink what their intentions were, and we will bullet item those points that you've raised related to the policies and the enforcement and all those things. All
right. Any other?
Just to kind of go back, I mean, I think your idea of inviting them, if it is an option for the next meeting, if you would, as the chairman, maybe give a line item or bullet points of your concerns, and then if it's a possibility for you to get with Cal, and maybe he can go to the city attorney based on that, kind of seems the order that you're suggesting, that has this been vetted, had it been looked at? Because, I mean, if you read through it, it does look like a blanket document. I mean, I've done enough myself of stuff like that. It looks like they took it from somewhere, put their stuff on it, and put it out, and there's just so much stuff that doesn't apply that it really needs to be more vetted, I think.
We're not sure that it even would have been vetted by our own risk management group either. That would be the other component in the city that might have an interest in how we're doing these things. So
that is really the crux of most of the pushback that I got was liability.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something we will communicate that to the fire department tomorrow and let them know, and we will suggest that there may be an agenda item next month, depending upon what happens. Cal may decide he wants to do something different, or there may be other avenues. The city manager may determine something else, and we'll go from there.
With that being said, my suggestion is that we table this and have it as an agenda item on the next month's meeting. Any discussion on that?
I'd like to make that motion.
I'd like to second.
All in favor signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Clark, thank you very much. I'm sorry we put you on the spot about something that you can't and have no control over. The next item is also probably not controlled by the airport staff. Before I go on to that, is there any comment from the public on the self-inspection fire form? Bill?
I'm Bill Rudolph from, I have Hangar 76. My only question or comment would be on that inspection. We've been having these inspections for years, and the fire department had a inspection sheet with about 30 items on it that they checked off. And it didn't have the electrical panel and all that. I would question them why they're changing the form. They'd walk through, you've probably been there, they walk through and ask you about things, check it off, and it's done.
Yes, I've been through several of them.
So that's my only comment.
Okay, the next item is discuss proposed airport fees. Steve, can you speak just to the genesis of how this is coming about, maybe, or Mark?
As I understand it, typically on an annual basis, the city reviews the consumer price index. I believe it's for Phoenix, and based on that, adjusts all its fees. Last year, I believe it was 1%.
Yeah, just a little bit more background. They used to be fairly active in adjusting fees on a analysis basis that would occur every year or two, and then as staffing and other priorities occurred, they basically then shifted to not doing any fee increases for several years based on the economy and things like that. And then when it became time to re-examine those issues and address those, they basically settled on a 3-year rotation for the in-depth analysis, and then having the CPI corrections in between time, with the caveat that if there was evidence of the fees being accurate or reflective of what things were, you could provide that specific information. So the airport kind of did that for the 3 main topics that were identified: hangars,
Executive hangars, city hangars, and Rondi, what was the other one that we thought was going to be an issue?
Shade ports.
Shade ports.
But that was only a quick seat of the pants review. It wasn't anything audit worthy, and it also wasn't all encompassing. In other words, we didn't go ahead and, I think there's 10 kind of categories, and there's 38 different specific ones, and so we didn't analyze all of them. It is the finance department or administrative group's opinion that in the absence of information, that all of them are too high to begin with, that they would be raised, except for those possibly that we had done that review of. So we wanted to make the board aware of that proposal. There's a public process that the city council will go through. I think the first meeting's in September.
It is in September, yes.
19th or something like
The 12th,
that.
actually.
The 12th or whatever. So obviously you have between now and then to, review this information and attend one of those meetings. Through your board representative, city council member, have those discussions. We basically will support the management team's policies, with the caveat that we did identify as staff that said, the anecdotal information we have is that the airport fees are probably on the high side, so we would suggest maybe not going down that road, but, you know, obviously we'll support the direction with the understanding again that there's a public process through this thing. So that's kind of the background information. The expectation is that the council does listen to the citizens. I know that there were several years where there were fees proposed for sports fees that were proposed to be raised based on analyses, and they determined that they didn't want to raise some of them. And so I think that public process works. So I would suggest that be, you know, that's one of the options, and then obviously writing letters and communicating with them directly. Be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
I think that was a good explanation to set the stage. I just have a comment. It was certainly the belief of our recently departed operations manager that the airport generated $30 million a year as an asset to the local economy. I champion that as well. I can't point to anything document that says that. I'm in hopes that the next airport master plan will address that as well, so that we have some actual numbers to go with. Having said that, it's been my belief that the goal of the airport is to increase the productivity of it and to enhance its viability and to attract new people to it. There's a danger when you make percentile raises that you just keep raising things and pretty soon you're priced way out of the market. Part of the survey that was, and at this point, there's nobody at the airport basically other than the board members that are aware that this is being proposed. So I appreciate you bringing it to us, and we will use this forum to get the word out to some people. A very small study was done of, for example, hangar fees, which are proposed to go up. Right now, Lake Havasu is priced well above the market on hangar fees. Instead of raising the rates, we ought to be looking at lowering the rates to get back into where we should be. So to me, that's a non-starter. The only, well, there is nobody higher than us. We're at the top of the heap. Deer Valley, which should be the highest one around, is 22 cents a square foot, and we're 28 cents a square foot today. We don't have a big area, and since it's small and we're the only airport around, people are paying it. But at some point, we're going to have people start moving out of hangars. Our competition just to the north has just built a series of brand new, spanking new T hangars, and it's my understanding that you can lease these brand new T hangars for $300 a month for a one-year lease. It's not going to take long before people decide it's time to go drive 35, 40 miles to leave my airport or aircraft in a hangar. So from my personal viewpoint of looking at all these, and it attacks this, if we're talking about transit aircraft, they don't go up a lot, but we're already very expensive as compared to other folks, which means that if you're traveling cross country as a general aviation person or as a corporate aviation, and you start looking for a place for a fuel stop, you start looking at ramp fees and fuel costs. And as long as I can tell you from experience, one runway is as good as another if it meets the requirement for my airplane. And if I can save $1 on fuel, I'm going to X airport as opposed to Y. And if I have to pay ramp fees at one and don't at another, I'm going to the other. There's a lot of people on this board that have been in corporate and commercial aviation, and they know that to be factual. So from my standpoint, my input is that I think there'll be a lot of pushback from this once it gets out into the airport population of the people that this directly affects, but it also indirectly, or it has a direct effect on people that we don't see daily, the ones that come in and provide business for our two fixed base operators, both of which who have just invested a ton of money at the airport. I can't speak to Havasu Air Center, but Desert Skies reportedly is in the $4 million range over the past year. And we have another expenditure coming up to build more new hangars. So if we start raising fees that they don't have any control over, that's subject to every aircraft that comes into their business, I think these business owners are going to be here saying, whoa, time out, let's regroup. So those are my personal opinions, and I'd certainly like to hear what the other board members have to think about it.
I'm on line with you, Mr. Chairman. I also did some checking just north, and they're significantly cheaper. A little further north, outside of the state, but North Las Vegas, their shade hanger fees are $100 a month, 45 for outside tie down, and 325 or 350 a month, not more than, for a comparable hanger. So we're just way out of the ballpark. We're a small city, and I used to live out east, and you would expect that as you go in towards Baltimore, Washington area, but not out, 75 miles, and it wasn't so. I paid $244 when I left for a hangar. I could get a couple cars in there and my airplane. So I think we're just, I'm sorry, but we're just diving towards the cement.
Go ahead.
One of my questions is why? I usually like to know, why are we raising the rates? I don't really, I know we've got lots of improvements in the works for the tarmac and stuff, but we were trying to get grants, we're trying to, save money and all those expenses. So of course, that's gonna be, I would think that the airport community is gonna say the same thing. Why do we need to go up more? What's the whole goal here?
And again, I think that what we're trying to communicate is from a practice standpoint, the finance department and accountants, if you have a CPI increase, you would make it for everything. You wouldn't delineate, and then you would kind of let the public processes sort out where that doesn't occur. So this is really part of that public process. I think from a staff standpoint, what we would really appreciate would be Steve's group did this little survey. Again, not anything, account audit of capable kind of thing, but the opportunity is here for you to communicate to us so that we can communicate that back to finance and give them a heads up. Is you think that information is accurate, you think that information is actually accurate, and there's other locations that you feel is, would provide that similar information, or if we were wrong, then we would expect you to say, no, Havasu's, no, that information, you missed the point. So I guess what I'm hearing is that you're comfortable that that does reflect the true cost structure, and that we are on the high end on probably everything across the board there. So that's what we appreciate that information. As experts, we can communicate that to the finance group and let them know. So.
What is your suggestion on the best way for this board to make our feelings known?
I think there's twofold. I would definitely attend the public hearing part of the process in front of the council, unless you feel comfortable that you've communicated that information through your city council representative, and you don't need to, but it's always good to, be there for that discussion. I think you also could consider some kind of letter from the board, either supporting or clarifying, that information. One of the things that, I've learned over the years as an engineer, because I think, the numbers speak for themselves, and sometimes people want to hear stories versus facts and figures. The answer is we did the facts and figures, but if they're hearing from business people and hangar operators and renters and tenants, and that's the kind of information the council likes to hear, because it connects better. So I would definitely encourage people to suggest in a very polite and respectful way that, hey, this may not be a case where you just want to carte blanche make the rise just because you've made the rise in other fees and costs. So.
Mr. Chairman?
Sir.
I have a couple of questions. One, what's the projected increase in the income with this raise? And second question is, what are we using that money for then?
I think Rondi did some preliminary numbers and came up with $3,000 or $4,000, so don't spend it all in one spot.
Yeah, it looks like, just looking at tie down, shadeport, hangar, those key areas, it looked to be an increase of about $4,000 in a year. However, 75% of that, which is about $3,000, was coming from hangar leases alone. So even though 4,000 seems very minute, the majority of that increase was coming from hangars, just because of the rate increase. And just like Mr. Clark said, the increase was a 2.4% straight across the board, across everything in the city. And so that's where it was just a carte blanche, you know, go through. And that's when we started to look at the dynamics of just a few specific fields. Whereas you can see in your packet, there's a whole list of all proposed fees. This just shows you the few that was targeted for review.
And as an example, if the 2% did actually result in a total increase in all of the city airport's non-grant revenues, that would be 2% of $500,000. It would be $10,000 if I'm not carried my things. So the reality of it is it's not a huge impact. But that's also the argument that the finance group will make is it's not really a large increase. It's only $10,000. So you know. But again, I think those are what you want to communicate to the people that are making those decisions, because they do listen. They do make choices based on what's right. And again, I think our information says we're on the high end.
I agree. The information does support that we're on the high end. It's also interesting that the next item we're going to talk about is budget history, but as we go through that and we look at our ramp areas and other things that we aren't going to get any federal grants anytime soon, and I know that I've had discussions with the Maintenance Service Division about that, and I think that we have their full cooperation, but all of a sudden we tell tenants that we're going to raise their rates, and they're already too high to start with, and yet they look out in front of their tie down or in front of their hangar and see 4-inch gaps in the tarmac. So it's a double-edged sword here.
And I think that's an excellent point to make to your city council representatives, because that's exactly what they will understand is, hey, we may have to, when we do an official analysis in a year or two, adjust some things, but we also want to be at the point where we're actually taking action as a result of that versus, you know, just, well, it was time to raise your rates. So
Exactly.
So I think those are the kind of arguments I think that will be really useful.
Any suggestions on how the board should communicate these feelings to the city council?
I think getting with Cal one, and I also agree. I think the letter's you know, a great idea with some facts in it from North Las Vegas and probably Deer Valley. I think those two speak real highly because that is a more affluent, higher population community that has a lot more traffic going on, and probably get with Desert Skies and Havasu Air as far as revenue, just a guesstimate of what they're bringing in. I mean, I can tell you last Sunday there were 6 Mustangs and 2 Phenoms that came in just to pick people up that were boating. You think about the fuel and what they bought and what those people spent over the weekend there, it's a decent amount of money.
It's absolutely a lot more money than even some of us at the airport realize that aren't attuned to what's going on. Let me open this up for public comment at this time. Bill, do you have anything to say? For those of you at home, it's issues like this that we really need you to come out and make comments on if you have interest at the airport. I guess at this point, I would kind of like to have a motion that is made that requires me to gather some facts together and write a letter to provide a copy to Mr. Sheehy and to the board members, and to also represent the board's feelings at the council meeting that considers this subject.
Mr. Chairman, I motion that you draft that letter to the city council regarding the rate increase.
I second.
I second. Go ahead.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's really getting late, so the budget review is, I have to say that the reason for this is that we're trying to understand more what goes into budget, because one of our responsibilities is to provide input to the city council on issues that have to do with the airport budget. It's interesting to me as I kind of went through this to see that other than grant funding, for the last 10 years, we haven't spent much money on ramps or anything else, and I know that we have plans to spend some money for maintenance to try to save some of this stuff and increase the longevity of it until we can see And this may have to be done for 8 or 9 years before we think we might be able to get federal grants to replace some of this. Before I go on, does anybody else have any comments about the budget that was presented? I mean, it's a lot of facts and figures. Unless you've studied it, it's hard to I know you just received this, so it's hard to have opinions.
Maybe let me kind of just talk a little bit in general. I can speak to having been here 23 years and kind of having paid attention to the airport because it was a part of Public Works and some of these other iterations or whatever, and worked with Ted before. It really was, in past tense, the city's policy not to spend very much money on the airport that wasn't grant funded. It provided a basic service of an airport manager, an airport administrative staff, and a couple of maintenance people, and then everything else was really grants. There really was no program to do any significant maintenance. I think in the 20 some odd years, I think we were out here crack filling once or twice. So that has been changed. That direction is to expend funds appropriately. We have kind of identified about 50 grand that we think we can utilize whatever we need to this first fiscal year. We've identified a mastic treatment for the cracks that we're out the process of identifying where those are at. We've also identified that we probably need to do some rejuvenation treatment on some of the taxiways, and both of those things seem to be within that, $50,000, and we don't anticipate that number changing. So as a part of this year's budget process, we will be identifying that, regular, routine, major maintenance, if you want to call that, within the operation budget should be, 25, 30, whatever that number is. So we're confident that we can address some of those issues. So I think moving forward, I think we've recognized that. We've had the meeting with the engineer, Lance, to kind of discuss where we're at. Obviously, we do have an issue with the overlay that occurred a couple of years ago, and we're going to have to just deal with that. I mean, we wish it would have been better quality, but we'll go through there. So what I would suggest is, rather than get lost in the weeds there, recognize that really revenues over the last 4 or 5 years, first of all, have dropped about $50,000 or $60,000, and so we need to probably look into what those are. I didn't have a chance to actually analyze whether that was hangar fees or fuel. That's the next step that Rondi's, who's now been on board 6 or 7 months, will dive into, so we can kind of get a feel for, okay, in the last 4 or 5 years, that $60,000 was across the board, was one specific area, so we'll do that. The second thing was recognize that the revenues basically just cover the true direct costs at the airport. They really only cover Rondi and Steve and the 2 maintenance guys and a very small O&M budget. So the recognition will have to be that regardless of how the interfund transfers work and everything else, we need to identify that it's going to require $25,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 of asset management support to maintain the runways so that they don't fall apart, because we don't want to lose that investment. And I think that argument will go a long way. So that's kind of where we're at. As we go through the budget process, which starts early January, they have a retreat. That may be an excellent opportunity for the board to have representation there, or at least communicate through your council member representative that feeling that we need to start investing back in. I think one of the interesting things is there's 100 jobs out at the airport, and however you want to pencil that out, that's a direct investment that we don't want to lose.
Absolutely. So I, for one, it's a breath of fresh air to have somebody stand up here and tell us that we're going to start doing some maintenance on things. I applaud your efforts. When the finance director made the presentation, I was in awe of all the numbers, and I'm still trying to get my arms wrapped around them. The one thing that struck me was when she got to the $360,000 a year that's coming, that the city's having to put forward to keep the airport afloat. But as I get into the budget, I find out that almost directly coincides with the figure that the city transfers out from the airport fund. So in reality, it's not costing the city very much. It's dollars, and it's accountable dollars as far as accounting techniques go. But the reality is, you're going to charge X amount of money for the city manager, but
Yeah.
he's gonna be paid for one way or another.
Well, what I did is I went ahead and took out all of the grants because that kind of skews your revenue numbers. And again, basically I have a spreadsheet that's got 5 or 6 years and it's out of the budget books and it nails that down. And it doesn't include that interfund transfer for the support services. So I basically taking that out of the way in the 5 or 6 years. There was 1 or 2 years where there basically was a $20,000 or $30,000 one way or the other. One year it was as high as $100,000, but I hadn't included the fact that there was $30,000 of general fund support for the capital outlay, so that really took that down to about 70. And then the last 2 years actually show on the good side, meaning that the city's actually having to put in $60,000 or $70,000 of real money, not the transfer in, transfer out stuff. So the reality of it is if you look at the overall period, revenues are balancing direct expenditures. The problem is I don't think the direct expenditures are going to be sustainable for the airport. So we have to recognize that regardless of that equation, we still need to include that $50,000 of capital asset recovery. But yeah, Steve had expressed that concern before, so I wanted to dive into the numbers in a different direction just to see what they do. Because one of the things that I hate about the budget books is it actually shows a depreciation value,
Right.
and then it takes it back out. Well, that's funny money.
That's very confusing to me.
Yeah. So again, what I would want to pass on is, and I'll be happy to sit down and maybe bring that information a little bit easier to understand. Relatively speaking, the airport has not been a cash cow that we've been siphoning money off of, but B, on the other hand, it also hasn't been a huge drain on the city either over that 5 or 6 year time period. It's basically been breaking about even, and we just have to recognize that even isn't going to get us what we need to do.
That's basically sums up what I got out of looking at these figures without being able to subtract out what you subtracted out. It appeared to me that on paper, it looked like the city was putting in $360,000 to keep the airport afloat, but they were also taking out 345 or something. So to me, that was a wash.
And that's one of the items that we will have a discussion with Tabitha about, because the interfund is actually a holdover from the previous, well, actually forever. The city had always used interfunds. I didn't care for them from a public works kind of standpoint, but that's what they always use. But Tabitha has been inclined to get away from interfunds and actually use direct transfers. In this case, I think it's a disadvantage to show that operation, because it really does create some issues maybe with the FAA. So we may end up just completely getting rid of that process, because in effect it's a null set game. It doesn't matter, but we'll have that discussion as a part of the budgets.
As we move forward, right now we're looking at historical, and really budgets ought to be looking forward, not backwards. I mean, we could discuss what was forever and not move forward 1 inch. As we go into the next budget year, would you be willing to come and include us in on your thinking of where we're at and how you're coming up with these figures?
Yeah, be happy to, because for example, if you'll notice, again, the spreadsheet I have, it basically the O&M, the real pencils and minor maintenance things that they do, has been averaging about $175,000 to $200,000 a year. And so that's the budget that we're talking about needing to probably have another $40,000 or $50,000 per year on it to accomplish what we want to do. I don't think anybody here cares whether the pen and pencil budget was $500 or $1,000. You really want to know what kind of budget do you have to do core critical maintenance.
Exactly.
And so we can communicate that discussion, and we can show where we're at, and really make a hard line discussion about, right now the major expense at the airport is our four people. Well, in the future, if that's not providing the level of service that we need to do, then we have to recognize that, okay, that's another $50,000 per thing or whatever. So again, but we would be happy to have that discussion.
Any other questions, comments?
The only comment I would throw in there is, and it's not measurable, is what kind of revenue are we generating from these people buying homes because they can fly their airplane in there, the cars they bought in town, the money they spent, within the city that is taxed in tax dollars. I know quite a few people that have homes here just because of the ease to fly in and fly out from California or wherever else they live.
And that's one of the items in regards to the master plan, or a piece of the master plan, is that the surgeons that you've all seen that come and go on a daily basis, and their impact on the community, both from an intrinsic citizen standpoint and the taxes and the fact of, as a person that's having a surgery, you don't have to be on the road for 2.5 hours and then stay in a hotel somewhere else, or 4.5 hours.
And I think that all fits in the whole process. One of the reasons I want Rondi to kind of examine the revenues and look at what's going up and what's going down, because that might give us insight into what's occurring. If fuel flowage is down, that obviously means there's less people fueling here. That could mean that there's less airplanes landing, and so we need to have that discussion. And so I think that's part of the things. I think we probably don't do a good job of tooting our own horn. For example, how much sales is occurring at the new restaurant. You know, that's a measure of activity. It's not all directly related to the airport, but you can assume that it's a constant factor. So the answer is, if that's going up, that means that there's more activity at the airport. We've even kind of kicked around some kind of counting. You know, like, I'm a traffic engineer, so you go count cars. Well, you know, is there a way of accurately counting airplanes? Do you do it one day and figure out what that is? Is that a measure of what's going on? So I think that's what we would be looking for, is to communicate to the public those activities. And I think that that's a reason for applauding the air show or those kind of events, because that gets the public out here and recognize this is that airport is an awesome opportunity to sell Lake Havasu City. It should have a visitor's kiosk in there. It should be something that if someone's out driving around and all of a sudden stops in there, there's information that communicates what's cool about Havasu. So
It's obvious that, to those of us that are connected with the airport, that probably the airport might be the third largest employer in the city,
yes.
which I know is not widely known. And initially, $30 million sounds like a lot of economic impact. But when you really ferret out these other issues that are comments on house sales and all these other direct impact things, it's very easily in excess of $30 million a year. And it's very hard. Initially, when I started looking at that, I'm thinking, well, what's the city getting for $360,000 a year? Well, they're getting a bargain. But in reality, it's probably not costing the city $360,000 a year either.
What a perfect question that pops into my mind. What is the sales tax revenue occurring as related to sales in this area? You know, if you're talking about the Phoenix area and they want to form sports districts and all that other stuff, that would be a simple question to find out. Is that information available? What is the sales tax that it's occurring in this area?
Well, we certainly know what the fuel flowage is, because we get
Yep.
so much per gallon off
So
that into the city fund.
Yeah, we'll work on those efforts, and we'll appreciate any suggestions that you guys have to steer us in the right direction.
Any other comments?
Just emphasizing that a little bit more, if you think about it, I mean, you're dealing with a more affluent person overall that is probably flying in business aviation or commercial, and the revenue, the money they're spending, and they're only coming here because they can fly a plane here. I mean, most of the customers I've flown for in the past all have the same statement. There's one thing you can't buy in the world, and that's time, but an airplane's pretty close. If you don't have grid access, good facilities for these people, they won't come. They'll go elsewhere.
That's exactly true. Let me open this up to public comment. Seeing none, I don't see a resolution for this other than for us to stay on top of the budget and to have it on the agenda as necessary as we move along, and to watch it and be prepared to provide input to both staff and the city council on where we think it needs to go. As the chairman, I'd like your approval to continue to watch this and maybe sit down with the finance director and get some more information to be able to present to the board. I'm seeing noddings of approval. Does anyone like to make a motion for that?
Mr. Chairman, so moved.
Second?
All in favor signify by saying aye, please.
Aye. Aye.
Well, we've managed to have another record-length meeting tonight. Future agenda items, the note that I made right off the bat was fire department self-inspection. I think we also, in addition to that, we need to get an update next month on where we're at on the moving forward with hangar inspections. We still need to keep all of our public at the airport informed of where we're at on this and where we're going. And right now, we haven't really taken that first step to do that. So I think if we can get the policy out sometime during the next month and to come back and talk about that would be good. I'm open to any other suggestions from the board members? Or any comments about the suggestions I've made? As board members, you're certainly free to, if an item comes up that you'd like to add it to the agenda, you can communicate that to Ms. Lichtel, and she can add it to the agenda. Future meetings are Wednesday, September 20th, 2017, and October 18th, 2017. And once again, if you're connected with the airport, there's some pretty important things going on that have a direct impact on your use of the airport and what you would like to see happen there. We'd certainly invite you to come to the meeting and voice those concerns so that we can help you realize the fruition of your concerns. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
I second.
Without objection, we're adjourned.